Carpets rolled underneath their arms. They began to shout, "Does anybody fancy buying a carpet? Does anybody fancy buying a carpet? Does anybody fancy buying a carpet? Does anybody fancy buying a carpet?" What I've been doing over the past few years, and what some of these signs represent, is talking to people and about their sorts of ideas and things that are around in the ether, if you like, and trying to make those sort of thoughts into sculptures. One of them came up to me. She was not all that beautiful, and she said to me, "You can sink into your misery, or you can come and embrace me." And in a way, she was very, very beautiful. Yes, does anybody fancy buying a carpet? Does anybody fancy buying a carpet? Does anybody fancy... I am a sort of total centrist woolly liberal, and I'm proud of it. But the problem with my generation of centrist liberals is that I feel that we've been a bit hijacked by Tony Blair. And so my political thing isn't to tell, and my whole shtick as an artist, I think, is not to tell people what to think or do, and to get people to take responsibility for their own kinds of ideas. One of the terrible things about what's going on at the moment is that people don't feel that they can rock the boat, because at the moment people think that democracy is under threat from terrorism, or it might be under threat from, not democracy exactly, but the Labour Party might be kicked out by the Tories in the next election or something. So they don't want to rock the boat, and that causes a lot of people to censor themselves. What I'm saying is actually democracy really depends on boat rocking, and that's my whole sort of political take on it, that it's important to say to politicians how one feels about things. Since Iraq, I've grown to hate the Labour Party and feel embarrassed that I voted for them last time. And one of the big things that's happened as well is that I've reread 1984, George Orwell's 1984, which is a book as a comprehensive school kid. You know, we were given this book and thought, this is what will happen if people don't take some sort of power and responsibility for themselves. And what we see now in the Labour Party is not that kind of Orwellian Big Brother vision, but certainly the mad authoritarianness. Actually, we take for granted there's a kind of consensus about what all this information means, and I suppose with the one of the ways of thinking about the more political things that I've done is trying to think about what sound bites and slogans and political rhetoric actually sort of embodies and what's happening when that's going on. And I suppose it's a sort of personal journey of thinking about what language sort of really means and how actually useless it is in a way in terms of conveying emotion, but also how, because it's a bit limited, it becomes like a sort of theatre, and you can do interesting things with it because it's a sort of very limited bag of tools that you can do stuff with. In the space also there are two sofas, and one sofa, which is a blue sofa, is called the blue ruin of democratic thinking, and there's another sofa called the brown ruin of democratic thinking. And that's basically because sofas for me are a symbol of unthinking, really. That you sit on the sofa and you watch television, and that's when nothing happens. And then there's another element to the show, which is this thing called the Bremen Conference. It's all about this idea about democracy again. And in Germany, they have an incredible open political kind of culture. And they allowed me to have their regional parliament in Bremen to do an art piece. And then also they allowed me to have 9 actresses from the theatre. And so we got these 9 actresses and dressed them up as great political and artistic figures. And the idea was that it was going to be a parody of the Yalta Conference. At the end of the Second World War, you know, sort of Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin got together and they divided up Europe, and they decided really how we were all going to live, and we live in that world really that they constructed at this conference in a strange sort of way. And then the idea of this also was that the actresses could talk from their own political perspective. So although Churchill, the actress playing Churchill, was a Shakespearean actress and talks very much like Churchill, she voices her own sort of political ideas, and in fact she was an incredible sort of liberal, so Churchill's being very sort of open and liberal. But with the Jesus character, we developed that character a little bit to be like a really angry talk show host. And she says things like, oh, what are we going to do with the Jews and the Palestinians? We ought to arm them all. And she sort of gets the cross and shoots the audience with the cross and goes, and then Martin Kippenberger comes in and says, well, Jesus, tell us something new. That's what we're doing anyway. Anyway, the idea here is that there are a few prompts here, visual prompts, that people can kind of caricature people, or they can make any kind of drawing that they want, really. The idea is that people can do drawings and they're going to be hung off the trees. And that, in a way, is a sort of homage and also a gross distortion and betrayal of a work of art by Yoko Ono. And lots of the things that I do have some sort of growing out of sort of fluxusy type things. So that's very important for me, the fluxus thing, but not in an uncritical way. And so my thing about this is that it's about sort of, you know, allowing people to do something in the space, which would be quite fun. The point about this and make your own damn art is that I have a slightly evangelical thing about art, which is another sort of personal journey, really, which is to do with my parents. And my parents came from incredibly humble, rather grim backgrounds, but because they were good at art, they were able to not go and fight in a boxing ring and get and work in a blue band margarine factory, which was my dad's destiny, or become a dressmaker, which was my mum's destiny. And because they were good at art, that was able, that sort of completely transformed their lives, really, and through sort of education and stuff. And so I really feel that you know, art has a kind of transformative kind of quality. It need not necessarily be beret wearing and palette you know, kind of induced kind of art. And it could be things like sport or entrepreneurial kind of activities which are at the periphery of people's lives. But actually, if you pull the things which you're really interested in and which are on the periphery of your life into the centre of your life, then that is an incredibly transforming sort of act. So this is a song for people interested in utopianism and architecture. Mum and Dad love Charles and Ray Eames. They painted our house bright modernist colours. Yes, they did in the 60s when I was growing up. And they filled it with tin toys. It was really beautiful. Mum and Dad lived in a geodesic dome. They used to fight so much you couldn't really call it a home. My sisters get out of prison next week. My brother hanged himself like that guy out of Joy Division. I'm an alcoholic. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Mum and Dad lived in it. This exhibition, the central piece in it is this thing called Eileen, which is a big sort of shack or a shed, and it's built out of 58 concrete blocks, and they are basically a transcription of a story of a friend of mine called Eileen. She's from Belfast, and she's had a kind of, I suppose what you'd say, it's quite a sort of tough life really in many ways, but it's a life that lots of people have in their families, I suppose. The story that is on which comprises the walls of the Eileen piece, the Eileen shed if you like, is this kind of sort of long, rather tragic shaggy dog story where she's brought up a Protestant, quite a sort of strict Protestant family, and the UDA firebombed the chip shop where she was brought up because they want her dad to pay them protection money, and he just thinks they're a bunch of thieving bastards. So he on principle doesn't give them money, and anyway, so they destroyed his business. Around about the same time that happened, the IRA shot her uncle because he was in the RUC and in the sort of in the police force. And so those two events shaped her sort of childhood. The son of her uncle then drove his car into a wall and killed himself. Kind of stand. And she finds out that her birth mother is English, and then it's also quite possible that, although she hasn't worked that out yet, that her dad was a Catholic. And then as she goes through her life, more recently she went to find her birth mother, and her birth mother turns out is married to a British Army soldier who was involved in, who she thinks anyway, is involved in Bloody Sunday. In a way, it's a sort of monument to the stupidity of sort of prejudice and preconceptions about people, and people laying ideas and saying you are this, and it completely messes up their lives. And then she had kids with a guy. Her man is this guy from the West Indies, and so she's got mixed race kids, and then her birth mother, when they were liaising through the sort of adoption agencies and things, the birth mother said, found out that Norman was black, and she says next you're going to tell me that he's got dreadlocks. The person at the adoption agency said, sorry dear, well actually they've all got dreadlocks. You can read all this around the outside of the building, and then you go inside, and and then it ends with the line where the birth mother says, you can always contact me dear, the answering machine is always on. Bob and Roberta Smith is that it's like a good way to think about them is that it's like a bit of a franchise, and that's how I'd like it to go. I mean, it's not always like that, but my thought about it, and certainly the thought that's pushed in this book, is that it's a bit like 007 or Doctor Who, that anybody can be Bob and Roberta Smith, and that it's just a sort of, it's like a sort of open door to bringing in your peripheral passions into the centre of your existence. If a member of the public wanted to come to the BALTIC and make some panels, they could make 58 of them, I suppose, if they wanted to, and spend the whole time here. But it's an example of what you can do with this sort of technique, if you like. And so people can come to the BALTIC and make concrete panels. And we're going to see how many we get, and if we get enough, we're going to kind of make another sort of island type sculpture, which will be basically the idea of the sort of, you know, help build a ruin kind of tautologist kind of idea.
Hey, baby, spend your wages. Baby, spend your wages. 'Cause I've got no love my own. I know fancy going home. Don't pay the bills. I'm just on moving. You are the final. The architect will go through. Yeah! You've been a victim of the automatic creed. Modernist aesthetic, this was automatic creed. Baby, let's spend your wages. Baby, let's spend your wages. 'Cause I've got none of my own. I don't fancy going home. Don't blame the buildings. Blame the scum who live there. You are the final. The architect who will go there. Yeah, yeah! You've been a victim of the automatic creed. Modernist aesthetic, this is automatic creed. Baby, let's spend your wages. Baby, let's spend your wages.
These are sort of abstract formalist paintings that I make. Every now and again when I get the urge. I haven't had the urge for about 18 months, but I store them in my garden. And so in my garden in London, there's a lot of these paintings which are just covered in plastic, and they only get to come inside when I do an exhibition. So usually when I do an exhibition, I sneak one in, and if it's a private gallery, commercial gallery, they say, what's this, Bob? And I say, well, it's one of my outside paintings. I've decided to bring it in. But afterwards, these are going straight outside again. Okay.